A CNN crew is driving across Iran right now, not through a war zone on paper, through a country trying to look normal. Snow-capped mountains, shepherds on the slopes, wheat fields beginning to green. But on the roadside, black billboards mourn a man killed in an airstrike. Cooking oil costs 6 times what it did months ago. And everyone the crew speaks to says the same thing. Trump could decide to start the bombing again today. A ceasefire exists, technically, but Iran's new supreme leader hasn't been seen in public since taking power. Peace talks are stalled. And somewhere in Beijing, the entire next chapter of this war is being negotiated without Iranians at the table. This is what's happening inside Iran right now. It's May 13th, 2026. CNN correspondent Matthew Chance and his crew are on the road from the Turkish border toward Tehran, one of the very few Western news teams operating inside Iran at this moment. They're entering the country with official Iranian government permission, and what they're witnessing is unlike anything that has come through official briefings or diplomatic channels. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran began earlier this year. U.S. and Israeli strikes hit parts of Iran. A naval blockade was imposed on Iranian waters. A ceasefire followed, but it is fragile, contested, and currently stalled. Negotiations between Washington and Tehran are going nowhere fast. And while world leaders meet in Beijing and issue statements, ordinary Iranians are hauling oil drums across the Turkish border by hand, eating kebabs in ancient rest stops while scanning their phones for news, and telling a visiting journalist they're afraid to even speak their minds. This isn't a story being told from a briefing room. It's coming directly from the road. If you follow this channel for fact-based international coverage without the noise, subscribe now, because this story is moving fast, and the next development could come at any hour. Let's establish exactly what the CNN team found, because the gap between what's being reported officially and what's actually visible on the ground in Iran is striking. The crew entered Iran from the Turkish border, a crossing point near Tabriz in the country's northwest. The drive to Tehran takes them through valleys of Tabrizi poplar trees, past the brown, swollen Kotur River rushing through the spring thaw. The landscape, according to Chance's reporting, is genuinely beautiful. Snow-capped peaks in the distance, shepherds with their flocks, a railway bridge with white-painted steel girders spanning a shimmering plain, apparently untouched by the strikes. Apparently, because apparently untouched is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Because the strikes did hit other parts of the country. Because the crew documents damaged infrastructure near Tabriz on camera. Because what looks normal from a distance turns out, on closer inspection, to be a country holding itself together with visible effort. Here's the confirmed sequence of events from CNN's reporting. Earlier this year, the exact date is confirmed as February, the United States and Israel launched airstrikes against Iran. On the very first day of that war, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in one of those strikes. This is a confirmed fact. The most powerful figure in the Iranian government, the man who had ruled the country since 1989, who oversaw every major strategic decision Iran has made in the modern era, was killed on day one. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, took power. Reportedly, Mojtaba was injured in the same strike. And as of the date of this report, May 13th, 2026, Mojtaba Khamenei has not been seen or heard in public since assuming the role of Supreme Leader. Let that settle for a moment. Iran's new Supreme Leader is invisible, and nobody is publicly explaining why. A ceasefire followed the initial wave of strikes, but ceasefire talks are now described by CNN as stalled. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet, through which roughly 20% of global oil supplies transit, remains closed as of this report. That closure is connected to the U.S. naval blockade of Iran, and the economic pressure it is generating inside the country is severe and getting worse. On the roadside near the Turkish border, CNN witnessed something that tells you everything about the state of Iran's economy right now. Crowds of day trippers, young and old, crossing from Turkey into Iran, carrying gallon drums of cooking oil by hand. An elderly Iranian pensioner explained to the crew that cooking oil is now 6 times more expensive inside Iran than it is just across the border in Turkey. 6 times. This isn't a minor inconvenience. This is a breakdown in basic economic stability, visible at the most ordinary, everyday level of life. Meanwhile, according to CNN's reporting, anti-government protests had been building inside Iran even before the war began, driven largely by cost of living pressures. When those protests came, the Iranian government's response was brutal. Iranian authorities have admitted that thousands of people were killed in the state's crackdown on demonstrators. And now, with the war hanging over everything, those protests have stopped. Not because things got better, because something heavier came along. What has the war actually changed inside Iran? In ways no diplomat's statement will capture, quite a lot. Iran's supreme leader is dead. His son has taken power, and no one has seen him since. A ceasefire technically exists, but the strait that controls a fifth of the world's oil is still shut. And the man who called this war his little excursion, he's currently in China. Let's zoom out from the road through northwestern Iran and look at the strategic picture, because what's happening right now extends far beyond any single country's borders. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a geographic feature. It is the single most important maritime choke point in the global energy system. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that narrow passage, from the Persian Gulf to markets in Europe, Asia, and beyond. Its closure is not a symbolic act. It is an economic event. Every day it remains shut, global energy markets feel the pressure. Shipping costs rise, supply chains recalibrate. Countries that depend on Gulf oil face difficult decisions. That closure is why Beijing matters so much right now. Both the United States and China, two governments that agree on very little at the moment, share a direct interest in reopening that strait. China is one of the largest consumers of Persian Gulf oil on the planet. A prolonged Hormuz closure hits China's economy in ways that no diplomatic posturing can absorb forever. And according to CNN's reporting, Trump is expected to use his state visit to Beijing specifically to pressure China into pushing Iran toward a compromise. Here's the twist. Iran's ambassador to China has publicly suggested that Beijing could play the role of powerful mediator between Washington and Tehran. So China is being courted by both sides simultaneously, by Trump, who wants China to apply pressure on Iran, and by Iran, which wants China to provide a diplomatic off-ramp that doesn't look like a surrender. China's position here is genuinely interesting. As CNN's reporting frames it, Beijing may calculate that appearing to help resolve a crisis caused by American military action is strategically valuable, a way to contrast Chinese diplomacy with what much of the world has experienced as American disruption. Whether that calculation holds or whether Chinese mediation actually produces anything, that is completely unresolved. Do you think this crisis finds an exit through Beijing, or does the deadlock continue? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one. Now, here's something that gets overlooked in the coverage of missiles and naval assets and diplomatic meetings. The cost of living crisis inside Iran did not begin with this war. It was already building before the first strike landed. CNN's reporting confirms that nationwide anti-government protests, driven largely by economic desperation, began late last year, months before the U.S.-Israel campaign started. When those protests came, thousands of people were killed in the government's response. Thousands. And the Iranian government acknowledged this. So the population that is now living under war pressure was already living under protest-level economic desperation. The war didn't create that pressure. It landed on top of it. And yet, and this is the contradiction that cuts through everything, according to Iranians speaking to CNN on this trip, the war has not pushed people toward resistance. It has pushed them toward silence. One father at a roadside restaurant, a man named Maddie, told Chance directly, Trump's war has silenced people and made the Iranian government stronger, at least for now. That at least for now is carrying enormous weight. Here is the detail that should stop you cold. Mojtaba Khamenei, the man now officially running the Iranian government, was reportedly injured in the same airstrike that killed his father. He took power, and then he disappeared from public view entirely. Iran is a country at war, navigating ceasefire talks, managing economic collapse, and responding to international diplomatic pressure. And its supreme leader has not made a single public appearance since assuming that role. Who is actually making decisions inside Iran right now? Which faction holds real power when the figurehead is invisible? And does the United States government even know? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions that intelligence agencies in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Beijing are working on right now, with incomplete information. The road to Tehran is long, and on that road, the CNN crew did something that satellite imagery and press briefings cannot do. They talked to people. What those conversations reveal is a portrait of a population navigating fear with an almost practiced steadiness. Not because the fear isn't real, but because it has become the background condition of daily life. Start with the young Iranian woman the crew encountered near the border. She was traveling from the United States back to Tehran. When she learned the CNN crew was making the same journey through northwestern Iran, her response was immediate. Don't go there. It's far too dangerous. She explained that she was only taking the risk herself because she had family in Tehran. She asked not to be identified. That single exchange contained something worth sitting with. Here is a person making a conscious, fearful calculation, the kind you make when going home is no longer automatic, when it requires a risk assessment. On the roadside, between kiosks selling pistachios and tea, the ordinary textures of Iranian daily life, black mourning billboards have been placed for the dead supreme leader. One banner quotes a Persian lament in Farsi. Another declares his son Mojtaba the standard bearer of the nation. But Mojtaba is not visible. The standard is there. The bearer is not. At a traditional caravanserai, one of the ancient travelers' rest houses that have dotted Iranian trade routes for centuries, the CNN crew stopped for food. Rice, spiced kebabs, thick, dark coffee. Around them, Iranian families eating, talking, going about something that looked like ordinary life. But there was a detail Chance flagged as striking. Most of the women in that restaurant were not wearing the hijab. To understand why that matters, you need a few lines of confirmed background context. In 2022, massive protests swept Iran under the banner Woman, Life, Freedom. The trigger was the death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman who died in morality police custody. Those protests, sustained, courageous, and brutally repressed, did not topple the government. But they forced a practical concession. The enforcement of mandatory hijab rules quietly loosened, and that loosening has persisted. So in the middle of a war, inside a country under military bombardment and economic blockade, Iranian women are still exercising that specific, hard-won space. It is a quiet act of persistence that carries enormous meaning. Back on the border, those crowds hauling cooking oil drums from Turkey into Iran, that image is more than economic data. An elderly pensioner, breathless from the effort, explained the price gap directly to CNN's crew. 6 times more expensive on the Iranian side. These are not young people with strong backs making a trading run. These are pensioners hauling heavy containers by hand because the math of survival in Iran right now demands it. A father named Maddie at the restaurant, helping his small daughter wash her hands, told CNN something that captured the current political atmosphere with unusual clarity. He said, most Iranians aren't thinking about protest right now, despite everything. And then he said the thing that requires careful thought. Trump's war has silenced people and made the Iranian government stronger, at least for now. That is a deeply counterintuitive outcome. The standard assumption in much of the Western analysis of this conflict has been that military and economic pressure on Iran would weaken the regime's grip on its own population, that Iranians, already protesting and already restless, would use the moment of crisis to push back against their government. What Maddie is describing is the opposite. Under external attack, internal dissent compresses. The same people who were protesting in the streets are now focused on getting through the week, on finding oil, on deciding whether to travel home. The war did not bring Iranians and their government closer together in any ideological sense. It brought them into the same survival mode. And in that mode, protest is, as Maddie put it, not even on the agenda. Trump himself, in the early days of the conflict, reportedly called it his little excursion. That phrase, confirmed by CNN's reporting, now sits very differently against the image of a pensioner hauling oil drums across a mountain border. The ceasefire is stalled. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Iran's Supreme Leader is not appearing in public. And Trump is in Beijing trying to get China to do what American military pressure alone hasn't done: bring Iran to a negotiated agreement. If Beijing doesn't deliver, what comes next? A return to strikes? An extended blockade? Does Iran's invisible leadership hold firm? Or does the pressure fracture something inside the government that we can't currently see? And here is the timing problem no one is talking about loudly enough. The longer the Hormuz closure continues, the more irreversible some of its economic effects become. Supply chains reroute, alternative arrangements solidify. The leverage of reopening the strait diminishes with every week that passes. The window for a deal may not stay open indefinitely. What does this moment actually mean? Not just for Iran, not just for the region, but for the architecture of how the world works. Start with the most structurally significant detail in CNN's reporting. Both the United States and Iran are looking to China for a way out. not to the United Nations, not to Europe, not to any traditional Western-led diplomatic framework, to Beijing. That is not a small thing. The United States launching a military campaign against Iran and then traveling to China to ask Beijing to help fix the resulting deadlock represents a striking acknowledgement of where actual diplomatic leverage now resides. China's role in this moment is genuinely complex. It has economic reasons to want the Strait of Hormuz reopened. Its own energy supply depends on it. It has strategic reasons to want to appear as a responsible global actor capable of solving crises rather than creating them. And it has long-term reasons to be cautious about being seen as simply doing Washington's diplomatic work. The Iranian government, for its part, appears to be calculating that Chinese mediation gives it a more dignified exit than direct capitulation to American demands. Iran's ambassador to China publicly floated the mediator idea, which suggests Tehran has already thought through what this kind of negotiation could look like and decided it's preferable to continued bombardment. But here's what none of the diplomatic framing addresses: the Iranian people. CNN's reporting from the road makes clear that ordinary Iranians are not passive observers of this process. They are a vibrant political force, in Chance's words. Even under hardline rule, even under wartime silence, even under a government that killed thousands of protesters less than a year ago. The silence Maddie described, the way war has suppressed domestic political energy, is not permanent. Silences in Iran have broken before, often faster and more dramatically than anyone anticipated. The Woman, Life, Freedom movement of 2022 was not predicted by most analysts. The scale of last year's pre-war protests caught the government off guard enough to trigger a mass killing. When the immediate threat of resumed strikes recedes, if it recedes, what happens to all of that compressed, unspent political pressure? That is the question no briefing is equipped to answer. It will be answered by Iranians themselves in their own time in ways that will likely surprise everyone watching from the outside. Meanwhile, the intelligence picture inside Iran remains deeply murky. A supreme leader who has not appeared in public since taking power. A government navigating war, blockade, economic crisis, and diplomatic maneuvering simultaneously. Factions within the Iranian system that have competing views on how far to compromise, confirmed historically by decades of observable Iranian politics, though the specific current alignments remain unclear. What comes next from this road trip through northwestern Iran is not a resolution. It is a confirmation that the gap between the official story of this war, the strikes, the ceasefire, the diplomatic meetings, and the actual story of this war, the pensioners, the oil drums, the silent father and his toddler daughter, is very wide. The next development in this conflict will come, maybe from Beijing, maybe from a resumed strike, maybe from somewhere inside Iran that nobody is currently watching. But it will not look like the last development. These things rarely do. This story is developing every hour, and the next shift, whether it comes from a Beijing agreement, a breakdown in ceasefire talks, or something moving inside Iran that we can't yet see, will matter enormously. What do you think happens next? Does China broker a deal, or does this quiet collapse into another round of strikes? Drop your read on this in the comments below. And if you want coverage that goes past the headlines and into what's actually happening on the ground, subscribe now. Every major update on this, we'll have it here.